From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Standing before a bitterly divided Congress, President Barack Obama this week laid out a laundry list of policy goals and let lawmakers know he'll do it with them or without them.
I intend to fight obstruction with action, and I will oppose any effort to return to the very same policies that brought on this economic crisis in the first place.
But critics say this was more a campaign speech than a State of the Union, and the chances of getting any meaningful legislation through Capitol Hill this year are slim. This week on Newsmakers, reaction to the State of the Union and the battle between protecting intellectual property and internet censorship, with our guest, Congressman Jim Langevin.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, my colleague, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. And this week, we welcome the news editor of the Providence Phoenix, David Scharfenberg. Good morning, gentlemen. And Congressman, thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. I want to start with the State of the Union, and I want to talk about Congresswoman Gabrielle Gifford. Watching that earlier this week, I saw that you sat just one seat away from her right up front. Did you get a chance at all to talk to Congresswoman Giffords?
I did, and it was certainly an emotional and moving moment seeing her walk onto the floor of the House after such a long time. She had been back for one brief visit previous to that, but it was the first time that she had been there for a lengthy period of time. Then she was there the next day, so I had the opportunity to talk to her that night, and I just told her how much we all missed her, and it was so good to see her back. It was a real inspirational, moving moment. I think the Congress needed that kind of bipartisan moment. To have her back there is very important.
Both you and Giffords share something. You were 16 years old when you were accidentally shot working with the Warwick Police Department in the Boy Scout Explorer program. While Giffords' shooting was no accident, a bullet changed both of your lives forever. Yes. You're further down the road than she. What advice do you have for her?
To keep doing what she's doing. Her story obviously is very moving and inspirational. It's an incredible comeback story. The fact that she survived that terrible attack, and she's making remarkable progress. I certainly understand that she needs to take time right now to focus on her health and her recovery, and then she even said that she wants to serve again, and that she says she will be back. And I believe that. I believe that someday she will run for public office again. She'll be serving in some capacity or another in public service, and she still has a lot to offer, and that infectious smile was still there, and that gleam in her eye, and I know she loved being there and being back, but I certainly respect and understand her decision to have to focus on her health right now, and we support her in every way in that decision.
Let's talk about the State of the Union. The President had a lot of ideas there, a whole laundry list, but can you sit here and say with a straight face right now that anything of substance is going to get through Congress this year?
Well, no doubt we're in an election year, but the President's speech was very much focused on policy and his leadership, his vision for where he needs to lead and wants to lead the country. He focused a lot on job creation, getting the economy back on track. That's exactly what the American people expect him to be focusing on right now.
Yeah, that's nice, but is he going to have the support of Congress?
In some things he'll have support. Clearly the Democrats are behind his message. I've been working on things like closing the skills gap. That's what he talked about in his speech. It's been frustrating for me to go around Rhode Island realizing how many people are unemployed, and I'm meeting with business owners, and I ask invariably, are you hiring? Do you plan to hire? What's the job situation here at this company? And they say yes, very often, that we are hiring or plan to hire, but the problem is they're having trouble finding qualified workers with the skills they need to do the jobs in things like IT and other areas of technology. So I've been working right now on trying to close the skills gap, both in a bipartisan way with my colleague G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania, and we co-chair the Career and Technical Education Caucus. We're trying to get federal money for job retraining. That's a bipartisan effort, and we need to do more of that.
I wonder, though, Congressman, the New York Times ran a big article last week on why the iPhone isn't made in America. And it was a fascinating read, especially in a state like Rhode Island that's lost so many jobs to China, from what studies show us. And I know you've been talking now for well over a year a lot about worker retraining, but as I read that article, that almost seemed like it's not an idea that measures up to the size of the challenge. I mean, another part of the challenge is how much of the supply chain in manufacturing has moved all the way to Asia. How much lower costs are there, and how the economies of scale when you have everything together, and the fact that workers there will get out of bed on a Sunday morning and do 12-hour shifts when Steve Jobs switches from a plastic iPhone to a glass iPhone. I mean, is worker retraining enough for are there really enough, so many jobs out there going unfilled that we can put all the Rhode Islanders who aren't employed into them if they just had a different set of skills?
So clearly we need to close the skills gap by training workers for jobs that are available now and well into the 21st century in things like technology. But we also need to change the tax code. The President talked about that in the State of the Union address. The tax code right now incentivizes companies moving jobs overseas. Why should we be rewarding companies to move jobs overseas? We should change the tax code, reward companies that bring those jobs back home or create those jobs here in America, particularly in manufacturing. We can do that, and that should be something that we should work on.
Yeah, but that goes back to my original question. Is that a realistic possibility for 2012, changing the tax code to make that happen? You honestly think that's going to happen through Congress?
The President has said that he wants to work in a bipartisan way to readjust the tax code to make sure that we're rewarding companies that create jobs here.
He says a lot of things. You're sitting in Congress. Can you say that that is going to be something that could get through Congress right now?
Well, there's no doubt that this has been among the most partisan Congresses that I've seen in my 12 years now being there. And there are some people that are there, if their sole intention, as Mitch McConnell has said, is their focus is on defeating President Obama at the polls in November, and that's what they're going to focus on, then nothing's going to get done, or those things are not going to get accomplished. But I do believe that there are members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that put country first, want to put politics aside, and want to do what's right on behalf of the American people. I have been trying to work in a bipartisan way to try to do that, as I said, with G.T. Thompson on the closing the skills gap legislation on career and technical education issues. I also have been working in a very bipartisan way on cybersecurity. That's something that is important to the country. It also means, of course, jobs, though. That means training our young people to go into the technology jobs in cybersecurity. They're going to result in meaningful careers going forward. I've created the Cyber Challenge here in Rhode Island, and it's happening in several states across the country, where we take these kids that like computers, that are good at computers, and we put them through a series of tests and challenges, and we reward them with awards and prizes for the high scores. But it's about getting these kids thinking about not just computers as a hobby and something that they happen to be good at, but something that could actually be a career for them.
In regard to cybersecurity, some of the doomsday scenarios have foreign powers shutting down our power grid, etc. But some of the critique of that is that countries like China that depend upon us so heavily for their own economy, and even countries like Iran that would be under threat of attack from us if they were to do something so bold, that they won't actually do such a thing, that this cybersecurity talk is overdone. What do you say to critics who would make that point?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that attribution is a very difficult problem. Someone could launch a major cyber attack, and you may not know where it comes from. It may look like it's coming from China, but it could also look like it's coming from Idaho, and you just don't know.
Would you support an attack on Idaho if it appeared?
We need to do a better job, obviously, on protecting our country's critical infrastructure, hardening our cyber assets, making sure that we're as secure as we possibly can be. We're vulnerable right now, and it's not just it's from individuals, potentially from criminals that's happening right now, criminal activity, terrorists, or even nation states. And you have things like that could happen: cyber intrusions, cyber penetrations or disruptions, or cyber attack. There's multiple ways you have to look at this. The word cyber attack sometimes is overly used. That's for the worst case scenario where the electric grid, for example, could be attacked and shut down, and you could see potentially a whole section of the United States that have the electric grid shut down and be without power potentially months. So those are the nightmare scenarios that keep me up.
Do you fear we're in sort of a pre-9/11 scenario where there were congressmen who were warned about Al-Qaeda in '99 and 2000 and 2001, and it wasn't on the radar screen, and then of course by the time something like 9/11 happens, it's all well and good to say it's too late then. I mean, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but...
Right. I am concerned that we're in a pre-9/11 moment right now, and I've been trying to raise the alarm bell that we need to do more in the area of cybersecurity. There are some things, good things that are happening. We're hopefully moving in the right direction, but not nearly fast enough. And I've introduced legislation to try to make us more secure in cyberspace. I've been working in a bipartisan way with my colleague, Congressman Mike McCall, Republican from Texas, Congressman Mac Thornberry, and many others. to try to make sure that we are as prepared as possible. But we've got a lot of work to do. Everybody understands that this is an issue. I don't think as a country we're taking it seriously enough. We've heard of people, and maybe we've all experienced it, that our emails have been penetrated, and people get spammed all the time. We've had people had their bank accounts have money stolen from the bank accounts, or the intellectual property theft. All these things are real challenges and problems that I've been trying to address in the Congress, but we have to get more serious and more focused on getting it right, and we're not there yet.
Congressman, Congress just considered a pair of bills known as SOPA and PIPA that aimed to crack down on internet piracy, theft of American movies and music, even sales of counterfeit pharmaceuticals, etc. Opponents said that this amounted to censorship, that it would break the internet, among other things. You had some strong words for it in opposition yourself. But those who supported the bill said, look, these were gross distortions of what the bill actually did. It was pretty narrowly tailored, and this was a big problem we were trying to address. Was there some substance to the critique of these bills, or was it a bunch of overheated rhetoric in your view?
Well, I strongly oppose both SOPA and PIPA. I think that the legislation to try to prevent intellectual property theft was overly broad, heavy-handed, and it would have fundamentally changed the character of the internet from being open, and we're trying to, of course, make it more secure. SOPA and PIPA basically would have allowed companies to request that sites be blocked, or if people were trying to get to them, or that the people trying to get to those sites be redirected to another site that said, you were trying to go to a site that was hosting.
But wasn't that provision taken out of the bill in recent weeks?
The blocking provision was taken out, but not the redirect.
Right.
And the problem is that we're trying to make the internet more open and more secure at the same time, and even that redirect would have prevented that from happening. Not to get too technical, but we're trying to make sure that end-to-end use is encrypted. And it's called DNSSEC, is the method of securing point-to-point usage and direct addresses that you're going to. If SOPA or PIPA had been in effect, it would have really prevented DNSSEC from being brought to the internet in a robust way. So there are other ways. I'm very concerned about the theft of intellectual property. There's no doubt it's a problem, both whether it's the theft of the latest Hollywood blockbuster, the movie theaters, or it's the latest fighter jet design. The intellectual property theft is a real problem, but I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with it without fundamentally over-regulating and changing the character of the internet.
You've talked about perhaps a market-based solution. We've seen companies like Apple with its iTunes and Netflix prove that people are willing to pay for access. But nonetheless, those two companies are up and running. They're doing very well, and we still see significant intellectual property theft. I mean, is there really a market answer to free? I mean, if someone can download this stuff for free, won't that always be tempting?
Sure. So there are market solutions to this problem. You outlined one of them, the solution that Apple created in creating iTunes. But there are also the Open Act is another example where we can use existing institutions like the International Trade Commission and law enforcement to go after and take down these sites when they're identified. But you need to have proper due process, and one of the bills would have allowed, for example, for no law enforcement really to be involved at all. SOPA would have allowed a company to go to an ISP and say, hey, that company over there is stealing our intellectual property, block people from going down, shut them down. And in theory that could have been done, and again, no checks or balances from law enforcement. At least the PIPA legislation would have had a company had to go to the Attorney General to petition. But again, it's overly broad. I oppose SOPA and PIPA. Thankfully, those bills have been pulled back, and hopefully we can come up with something that is far more reasonable.
We're going to have to go to a break pretty soon here, but there's some controversy in your district, and it's getting national attention. The New York Times this morning, we tape on a Friday, is ran a piece on Jessica Alquist and the prayer banner. Do you agree with the federal judge's decision that the banner's presence in the school is unconstitutional?
Well, I believe in the separation of church and state. I believe in the concept of not recognizing or establishing any one religion. But I personally didn't have any problem with the banner being in schools. I also am fine with the "In God We Trust" on our coins and dollar bills, or saying the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God. And so, as I understand it, the banner didn't recognize any one particular religion. but it did have, reference to God, and it was a prayer.
Should the school appeal? Should they spend the money to appeal this?
I'm going to leave that to the school department to decide. I'm not going to interfere with the local issue or decision, but I personally didn't have any problem with the prayer being in the school.
All right, we're going to take a break here on the program. Our conversation with Congressman Jim Langevin will continue. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and from the Providence Phoenix, David Scharfenberg. And we welcome our guest, Congressman Jim Langevin. Congressman, I was struck in the first half when you said that you pointed out Mitch McConnell, something he had said a couple of years ago, I think, that his entire goal is to make sure that President Obama doesn't get reelected. But aren't the Democrats in Congress guilty of exactly the same thing? And I think of the payroll tax cut here. Democrats claimed a victory when House Speaker John Boehner was caved to pressure and signed onto that temporary tax cut at the start of the year. He was looking to make it last longer. Now that's exactly what is probably going to happen, something that everyone's considering. So wasn't he and the rest of the GOP right on this one, right all along, that it's going to be extended anyway, and this wasn't just a battle to make him look bad and make the rest of the GOP look bad?
Well, remember, this was negotiated in a bipartisan way on the Senate side, that they came up with a short-term extension of 2 months with an 89-10 vote. So we should have taken that bipartisan agreement and just passed that in a bipartisan way.
But everybody knew when you guys came back it was going to have to be dealt with again, and here we are. So what was that fight all about? Why not have extended it right then and there?
I would have liked to have had a long-term extension of the payroll tax cut.
And that's what Speaker of the House wanted.
Right, but unfortunately that's not what we were presented. That's not what Harry Reid could get through the Senate. The bill that we should have taken up is certainly a long-term extension, but for whatever reason that couldn't be done. And
so the Democrats in the Senate held it hostage, is what you're saying?
I'm just saying that what came back from the Senate was a 2-month extension on an 89-10 vote from the Senate. We should have just taken that up, passed that, get us through over the next couple of months, so that a longer-term extension could have been negotiated.
But Speaker Boehner...
Look, there's no doubt that both parties are guilty of too much partisanship. We've got to put that aside. We have to get back to the process of governing. Washington right now, I'm frustrated with a lot of times that it's broken. It's not working the way it should on behalf of the American people. And I don't know what it's going to take to force a paradigm shift to get us back to good public policy making. But something has to change, and I'd like to say let it start, here with each individual member trying to reach out and trying to solve these problems collectively together.
It's a real possibility Republicans could attach the Keystone Pipeline to the payroll tax extension. How passionate are you about the Keystone Pipeline? Is this something where you would vote against the payroll tax cut extension if the Keystone Pipeline was a part of it?
Yeah, I think in principle the Keystone Pipeline is a good idea. We just have to get to the right way, make sure that we're building it that's environmentally sound, that if the worst case scenario happens, we're not, for example, polluting a major aquifer in the United States that people rely on for their drinking water. This could mean a lot of jobs that if we build that Keystone Pipeline.
You differ with the president on
this. No, I don't necessarily think that the president is necessarily opposed to the pipeline yet, but he wants to make sure that it's built in an environmentally sound way, not we just rush to just do it because it's a good idea. There's a right way and a wrong way to approach this, and what he wants to make sure is that we're building it in areas that are not environmentally sensitive and that we do it the right way.
You mentioned good.
And by the way, that would be a major step forward in freeing us of our dependence on foreign oil. For the short term, if we're getting much more of our oil from Canada, we don't have to send money overseas. We're keeping it in this area. And then, of course, the President talked about the domestic production of natural gas, that we have abundant supplies that could last us for the next 100 years. I think that's a great step forward. Also, though, we need to focus on green energy technology. That's the technology of the 21st century, and that means putting that money here, building that technology, and we're not sending, again, our money overseas to countries, quite frankly, that very often don't like us very much.
You mentioned good public policy making. It was pretty clear the end of last year that's not how your office would describe the redistricting process here in Rhode Island. You and Congressman Cicilline had a very public brawl over the maps that came out. He said he had nothing to do with the changes made by the consultant that the state hired, which went far beyond the 7,000 that needed to be moved that the two of you requested in Providence. Do you believe that?
Well, I was very clear and consistent about what I felt should be done in the redistricting process, that we only had to shift 7,200 people from my district into the 1st Congressional District. I think that's the way it should have been handled. But the commission made its recommendation. I was very clear and consistent about what I thought should be done. Common Cause felt the same way. They voiced their opinion. The Providence Journal, it was very clear about there should have been a minimal shift in voters. The commission looked at a variety of options when my views weren't being considered, when the maps that we were being shown showed major shifts all the way along. At one point, it was a shift of 150,000 voters. I spoke out clearly because I didn't think that was the right way to handle it. But
his question is: did Congressman David Cicilline, was it gerrymandering on his part?
Oh, I'm not going to get into that. And
Did you already? For all due respect, Congressman. I mean, that ship has sailed.
My position was very clear. I thought there should have been a minimal shift. The commission considered a variety of options and views, and they made their recommendations. And look, we've moved on.
But take it from the other direction. As Dave wrote when he covered this as extensively as anyone, the best story about it actually. And Dave pointed out, you are a Democrat. Congressman Cicilline is a Democrat. Congressman Cicilline is in trouble, and maybe he needed more Democratic voters. Maybe it was the interest of your party to allow something more broadly to go through without making this big public fuss that made him look worse.
Yeah, well, look, there's no doubt that the redistricting process, by its very nature, is a political process. But I also felt there's a matter of fairness in what's right and what's wrong, and I felt there should have been a minimal shift. I made my position very clear. I spoke out and was not shy about saying that.
And just to finish this, what do you think of the final maps? That are
well, it certainly had scaled back. It was dramatically from what some of the maps had proposed when it was a major shift of up to 150,000 voters, but still, more than what I thought needed to be done. But again, the commission has made its recommendations. The legislature is on the verge of approving those maps, and look, we moved on.
Do you have any long-term concerns about the state of your district now in terms of it being perhaps more friendly to a Republican? If you ever decide to retire, I think most people think you're pretty safe now, but would that seat be more amenable to a Republican?
Well, first of all, I never take anyone or any voter for granted, and I've got to go out there, as I do in every election, and earn the vote and make the case of why I should be reelected, and that's what I plan to do. Whether it's going to be, easier down the road for a Republican to be elected to the seat, I can't speculate, but it's certainly the dynamics of the district, have changed somewhat.
How long do you plan on being a congressman?
As long as the people want me to keep doing it. It's an honor for me to serve in the United States Congress.
20 years, 30 years, onward.
I'm a young, healthy guy and want to keep on doing it for as long as the people want me to do it. And at some point, I may feel I've done all I can do for the people of the 2nd Congressional District, but I'm not there yet. I'm still working on a number of things. And in terms of job creation, cybersecurity, national security is a great focus of what I'm doing. Where I'm concerned about this building of submarines at Quonset Davisville. That means those are jobs for Rhode Island. It's important to national security, and I feel like I'm still making a strong contribution in the Congress and representing my constituents well. We have a lot of work to do to get this economy back on track and create jobs, and that is my #1 priority right now, and I want to continue to focus on.
When you look now, you mentioned off the top you've been in Congress 12 years. What would you cite as your #1 individual accomplishment as a member of Congress?
My contribution to raising the awareness of our vulnerabilities in cyberspace and how dependent we are on the internet and how vulnerable we are in terms of cybersecurity. I'm also proud of domestic legislation that I've supported in terms of the universal health care bill that we finally passed and created. I've been working on that for many years, and I was proud to be there and be a part of that effort to reform our health care system in America that's going to cover the American people and cover the uninsured, closing that gap. I've also passed the Lifespan Respite Care Act that helps vulnerable families right now who care for a sick child or an elderly parent at home. We spend over $350 billion a year in uncompensated care, if you were to put a dollar figure on it, families that are taking care of a sick child or an elderly parent. And their families are stressed right now, and even the caregivers, especially if they're the sole caregiver, need help and support. And legislation that I passed helps better coordinate our respite care system to give them a little bit of a break.
Congressman, we have about a minute left in the program, so I'm curious why you think Rhode Islanders should vote the president back into office when you consider last month our unemployment rate actually shot up. Why should they put him back in office?
There has been no president in modern history that's had to deal with the kind of things that President Obama has done. The economy almost fell off a cliff. There's a near collapse of our financial system. We have rallied back, and we've come a long way from where we were at those very dark days.
Has Rhode Island
Not
rallied
nearly
back?
enough. And if you're one of those people that are out of work through no fault of their own, they need a job. And that is my focus. That is my primary concern right now. That's the president's primary concern. And he's trying to leave no stone unturned to create jobs. I'm trying to leave no stone unturned to create jobs. And we're going to get this done. But the more bipartisan support we have to do it, the better the country will be, the better Rhode Island will be.
Super Bowl prediction, Congressman?
New England Patriots.
Yeah, a lot of Giants fans in your district.
By 7.
Yeah.
I'm behind the Pats.
By 7?
By 7. I think by 7.
You heard it here first.
And my uncle's a big Giants fan. There's a little rivalry right now in the Langevin
Thanksgiving
family,
must be a lot of fun then.
Yeah.
All right, Congressman Jim Langevin, thank you very much for joining us on the program. If you missed the first half, as always, you can catch it on our website, WPRI.com. It's under the on-air section. From the Providence Phoenix, David Scharfenberg. From WPRI.com and Nisi's Notes, Ted Nisi. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next week on Super Bowl Sunday on Newsmakers.